Concepts, Values and Wise Advice from the Meier Contacts compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Wise Advice.
Ask Its Explanations Part 6.
Life demands all sorts of things, as you say. But we must tread our path and traverse it in honor and in fulfillment of the laws. As I will tread my path, so will you also tread yours, and in the same way every human will always have his own path to traverse. The coming event, which is chosen for me as a martyr, will also change nothing in regard to that. The event contains only bodily pains, but they will be lost on the wind through the power of the Spirit and my thinking and knowledge, as well as my wisdom and love.
Contact Report 10.
But to become such a human being in prosperousness, one must seek and find the truth, create knowledge from it, wisdom and love, because the human being is only able to grow spiritually and consciousness-based through truth, knowledge, essence of wisdom and love, wherethrough she or he is liberated from all human weaknesses. She or he is no earlier enlightened and completely liberated than when she or he remains constantly and continuously in thought in the unending creational spiritual reality. The spiritual intelligence is enlightened by law-based spiritual principles and is directed toward the creational inner core nature, the absolutely full development, and the power of the creational itself. This is in contrast to the human intelligence, because the human material consciousness is generally concerned only with individual things of the material world. But this has the consequence that the human being is constrained and hindered in every direction, indeed even captured, oppressed, plagued, and tortured by all possible forms of mishappening, weaknesses, and enslavements of all kinds. Hence, a self-analysis of the individual human being is one of the most essential methods for finding the truth and for going the way of the consciousness-based and spiritual evolution. Thus, it is necessary that the human being continuously checks his or her thoughts and sees what kind they really are. She or he has to make sure that she or he is ultimately always guided, led, and destined by creational philosophical principles and realities, by creational natural laws. In the human being, the constant conscious feeling should reign that she or he belongs to the creational, with his or her actual spiritual breath, his or her actual spiritual being. Consciousness-based, it shall be clear to him or her that his or her actual spiritual being is inseparably one with the creational, so as to overcome the material outer world in this consciousness. This creational philosophical truth and cognition should always, first and foremost, control the human thinking, feeling, and acting. Because only the one who is one with the Spirit can in the long run recognize and also do good, because she or he has the capabilities of the creation in him or herself. Nothing negative in the unending universe can affect and enslave him or her anymore. Besides this creational philosophical consciousness, there is still the practical, dynamic, creational one, that is, the mystical consciousness, which consists of the perception of the one reality in all things. May the human being therefore be a practical philosopher and mystic, and perceive the reality in the changeable passing forms. After all, what is a human being? She or he is only a figure and a name. If one takes away the name and the figure, what is still left of him or her? There remains the fundamental essence, the existence, the spirit, and the overall consciousness block. That human being who overlooks this is pushed away and around by the slightest breeze of the wind, instable, without hope of rescue, and always striving to still find a firm hold somewhere, which, however, will never offer itself to him or her unless she or he seeks and finds the fundamental truth. The human being, who truthfully lives in accordance with the spiritual laws of the creation, sees and recognizes the creational all around in every life form, in everything, in every thought and action, in every human being, in all the activity of the nature, and also in all imaginable circumstances and occurrences. The human being who follows the laws of the creation becomes the most prosperous and fearless creature. His or her will is insurmountable, his or her dedication unmeasurable and endless, and his or her essence of wisdom and his or her love permanent and absolutely fully developed, not capricious and not full of doubts like generally those of the ones who are dependent on religion and of those who are otherwise led into the unreal. His or her sense resembles the vast, endless ocean and does not allow to be taken out of his or her stillness. She or he does not tremble out of anxiety. May she or he therefore unfold his or her spiritual sense, which is no longer reached by any perverted negative power. The sense which no longer grants shelter to any negatively perverted thought and also pushes away all positively perverted thoughts and actions. Only an equalized sense which is rooted in the creational service, in the creational essence of wisdom, its knowledge, its love, and joy, which are more real than all the material walls all around and the human environment, is valueful and serving the development of consciousness and spirit. May the human being consciousness-based be always great and constructive. If the human being views his or her fellow human beings only externally, materially, then she or he sees nothing but the form and shape, the material of this particular human being. If, however, she or he sees the fellow human being with the consciousness-based and spiritual eyes of the cognition and knows that this all-witnessing consciousness in him or her is also present in all others, even if it is unrecognized by them, then the way in which she or he sees his or her fellow human being changes fundamentally. She or he then no longer simply sees a man, a woman, a girl or a child, but sees the fellow human being as bearer of a creational spirit, which knows about itself, about its existence, and wishes to reveal itself through everyone, if only the opportunity to do so would be offered to it. The one who knows the truth sees the fellow human being based on this knowledge and cognition, because she or he sees the creational in him or her. The human being can free him or herself from everything. Everything can be taken away from him or her, except not the creational consciousness, the spirit, the existence in his or her innermost, this pure spiritual creational realm in him or her. She or he can be robbed of all his or her goods and possessions and be driven out of his or her home, but no one is able to drive him or her out of his or her spiritual realm in his or her innermost. So the human being should constantly be conscious of this creational, without which she or he would be unable to do any breath, to conceive any conscious thought, without which she or he would neither be able to recognize, see, hear, nor experience. The human being is to accept the entire realm of everyday life and his or her experiences as creational. She or he is to see him or herself everywhere in the space and in the times and in all things. She or he, him or herself, is to be everything, and is to awaken the creational in everything and bring it in this way into recognition and experience. Because the creation is in all and everything is animated by its spirit, wherethrough everything is one in all. The only question is, how should the human being identify with everything if she or he does not know the path of the spirit? Generally, she or he tends to identify with his or her body. But what happens if she or he tries to engage in the truth and inwardly directs him or herself according to the creational being and the spiritual reality? The whole world non-arbitrarily dissolves in this real reality truth of the spiritual. Everywhere the one sole principle of the creational spiritual is in place. But how is the human being to identify with everything? May she or he for once see him or herself as he or she really is. In general, she or he identifies with his or her body. She or he cares for it like it would be a treasure, nourishes it and troubles him or herself about it to the point of self-sacrifice. She or he surrounds it with pride, frippery, and a senseless delusion, while she or he nevertheless allows his or her consciousness to fade. However, because of a little pain, she or he already becomes angry, grouchy, and unpleasant towards others, or she or he even starts to complain and to cry, has self-pity, or robs him or herself of his or her life. She or he surrounds his or her body with an indefinable glory and with vanity, anxiety, worries, pride, and problems. Always everything revolves only around his or her body. She or he often even extends his or her body identity to his or her material possessions, or she or he gets upset when a fellow human being touches him or her unwantedly. But what, on the other hand, will a human being with recognized consciousness-based and spiritual truth do? She or he will identify with all things and all life forms of the world and the universes. A human being full of creational spiritual essence of wisdom, full of knowledge, truth, love, and cognition, who knows that everything comes out of, and will for eternal times come out of the truth. Hence, she or he identifies with everything and everyone. In his or her consciousness-based being, he or she will, at the innermost level, always be one with everything and everyone. At the innermost level, she or he will identify with his or her spiritual consciousness and with everything in the universe, just as the other, who thinks materially, identifies with his or her body, with his or her money, with his or her goods and chattels, with his or her irrational speeches and irrational teachings, and with the sound of his or her voice. But once the human being has identified with everything in the universe, then no hatred and no greed can dwell in him or her anymore, since he or she no longer makes any selfish distinctions. Because she or he has become one with the inner core nature of everything. Others may claim something as their exclusive property, but the one who thinks in relation to the spiritual identifies it with the truth therein and, therefore, has everything internally as his or her own. All fear has given way from him or her by him or her identifying with the truth. This truth of the creation and of the spirit, with which she or he is one, even directs the hand of the enemy, which wants to rise up against him or her, so that it falls back on the enemy, him or herself. The one who is thinking in relation to the spiritual is safe and protected, and the entire nature is friendly-minded towards him or her. In fact, even his or her enemies must eventually serve him or her. With their attacks, they cause the powers of the consciousness-based rationality to unfold in him or her to even greater power and might and overcome everything evil, villainous, and perverted. The enemies ultimately only contribute to the growth of the one who thinks consciously and creationally and to the recognition of the truth. The enemies ultimately only contribute to the growth of the one who thinks consciously and creationally and to the recognition of the truth. All unreal suggestions and human imaginations become corrected by the human being realizing, I am a part of the creation, which animates me as a part piece, as spirit. But the knowledge that all things are imaginations and illusions, except the creational spiritual power, truth, and reality, will by no means diminish the keenness which the human being unfolds in the life, but rather propel him or her to unexpected heights. The truth is that which is immortal, like the creation as such. It is that which is eternal in time, that which is relatively absolutely fully developed, that which is worth all energies and the total investment of will by the human being, because with it, the human being does not fall prey to any deception. Hence, she or he is to hold fast onto the truth and is to become unshakable in always equally lasting stillness, joy, knowledge, love, strength, and essence of wisdom in all things. The creational alone is endless essence of wisdom and endless truth, with which not one iota of erroneous assumption is possible. Hence, the human being is to take power from the creational essence of wisdom and is to seek his or her light in his or her own spirit as well as in his or her consciousness. The truthfully human being knows well that she or he is not able to move his or her hand in the space without touching the creational myriads of times, since it is ever present in all times and spaces. The true and real human being is full of joy when she or he knows about the truth that the unendingly and undescribably powerful creational is ever present and surrounds him or her wherever she or he may go. The creational is full of endless peace, full of endless cognition, and relatively most total, absolutely full development. It is the source of all miracles of the highest spiritual consciousness, which is present all around, inside like outside. His or her joy is as endless as the spiritual life itself. In order to make rapid spiritual and consciousness-based progress, the creationally thinking human being regards everything and everyone as creational. As soon as she or he sees something, she or he sees the creational. Behind all, and also in the forms of manifestation of the creational itself, the creational always stands in front of him or her. That is why the creation-thinking human being does not walk this way and that way in order to achieve the highest level of experience, but rather finds always the best place to gather recognition and experience right where she or he happens to be. His or her spirit that is to be developed and his or her consciousness are in him or her and not in any other place. Through his or her own thinking and acting, she or he must form spirit and consciousness. From this cognition, his or her attitude becomes a dignified place, and also all things with him or her become dignified, also the ground under his or her feet. The creation-thinking human being does not consider the future to be the time to experience the creation and his or her spirit dwelling in him or her, but rather the immediate present, wherethrough, however, she or he lives in the eyes of the normal human being who is poor in consciousness, already in the most distant future, often completely misunderstood. For the true creation-thinking human being, the time is not someday, but always in the immediate present. For him or her, it is not necessary to see physically to see the truth. She or he begins to search in him or herself, and the truth becomes ever more real to him or her, because for his or her material consciousness, his or her spirit is, after all, the all-seeing presence. No word that is spoken anywhere remains unheard by him or her. To make faster progress, the human being living based on this direction acoustically extracts the sound of the truth from every sound she or he hears, so that every sound enters his or her material consciousness and fixes itself. Likewise, everything reminds him or her of the creational and the immediate truth. Every circumstance is a creational circumstance, each opportunity a creational opportunity. The creation-conscious human being lives and works in such cognition, and thereby she or he advances innerly. The great, the spiritual, is for him or her present in his or her innermost, because in the cognition of the truth, the unending dwells in the finite. And in every human being the unending has its seat, something that, however, only very few are able to recognize. because awakening the unending requires rational logic and a state of being free of unreal teachings. But awakening the unending and letting it become effective is the culmination point of the life, the relatively highest possible consciousness-based and spiritual relative absolute fulfillment. Those who are rich in the consciousness become the instrument by which the creation expresses the spiritual realm. It is this excellence of the creation that causes the firmament to arise. The ones who are rich in the consciousness are free of all boundaries of a restriction and of the material selfish ego consciousness, and therefore in constant contact with the creation as such. With the human beings, the difficulty of the material principle still prevails. However, in not too distant a time, the earthly science will discover the principle of the creational in the material. This is because the creation is included in everything created, in everything that unfolds and further develops itself. Only the unlimited spirit and the creation as such signify true freedom, true relatively highest possible absolutely full development, true cognition, might, love, knowledge, truth, and essence of wisdom. They are all, in their realistic absoluteness, the creational as such. Therefore, to attain anything truly veritable in the life, the human being must hold on to the spiritual, the unlimited, and the unlimitable. Everything that is limited and limitable produces unreal things and problems. However attractive it may seem, it will nevertheless one day become the source of problems and unrealities. The finite things of all forms are unnatural to the innermost nature, to the spirit, and are still strange to the human being, and so she or he also cannot recognize them as truth and cannot love them without inflicting the heaviest suffering on him or herself. The finite things are always and at all times afflicted with some deficiencies, because everything that is finite brings with it problems and difficulties. If the human being loves or possesses something finite, it has at least the deficiency that it is transient with absolute certainty. She or he might love it however much according to the human sense of love, but when its time has come, it passes, and she or he mourns over the loss of it. The limited, however, still has weaknesses in other respects. Even if it does not perish immediately, it is at least subject to the change. When it is filled with human love for a blink of an eye, it may be displaced by or filled with human hatred for the next blink of an eye. Whether it is a thing which changes or perishes, or a human being who changes his or her attitude towards his or her next one negatively, the result is always sorrow and suffering, while the unlimitable never changes and does not fall victim to alterations because it is of unlimitable faithfulness and absolute permanence of value. When essence of wisdom and truth dawn in the human being and his or her consciousness-based as well as spiritual knowledge increases, when universal love leads him or her and his or her life becomes prosperousness for him or her and others, then the cognition of the truth has matured in him or her. Then she or he will become conscious of the part of the creation in him or her, of the spirit, of the spiritual realm. The creation is present in spiritual love and essence of wisdom. Whoever strives for spiritual light and spiritual love will have the gate to the creation to open to him or her. If the human being loves the truth, then she or he loves that which is relatively absolutely fully developed and wonderful and manifests the spiritual realm in itself, because it is also the way to the realm of the essence of wisdom. May the human being become conscious of the creational presence and let the spiritual intelligence shine forth from everything. She or he is to recognize that even in the wide, unending, and open space, the eyes of the creational are directed towards him or her, and that the creation is the true intelligence, and sees him or her with the eyes that retain everything and are endowed with senses that are able to give an answer to everything. She or he shall therefore consciously live spiritually under the eyes of the creational. Live with the consciousness of the spiritual, which is infinite power, of which she or he must always be conscious. In that case, she or he can never be powerless.
Contact Report 11.
The truly spiritual and consciousness-based striving one is like a notable artist, of a tender consciousness, of a gentle being, full of love, knowledge, wisdom, and great sense. He or she has the highest sensitivity for truth, balance, beauty, and spiritual as well as consciousness-related progress. His or her life is controlled, purified, and sublime, and his or her perspectives are very broad. His or her whole sense is magnanimous, and beauty expresses itself in his simple life, full of high dignity. His or her inner peace holds a beauty which no artist can paint and no poet can describe in words. His or her spiritual and consciousness-related purity has an attraction force which cannot be expressed by any music, no matter how harmonious. His or her security can be on an equal footing with nothing, and no end to his or her striving and goal can be set by any boundaries. His or her wisdom is an ever-present light which shines in the deepest darkness. It is not like a light of a day, which can be overwhelmed by the darkness of the night. It is also not like the light of a great human thinker, which just always fails, and often doing this right when he or she needs it the most. His or her presence is a ubiquitous outpouring of eternity, which never passes away, while the aroma of the most beautiful and most fragrant rose or orchid of the world fades away and disappears into the ages of the endless. In the non-creational thinking human being, the material intellect, with all its given limitations, takes the highest place and thereby has, as a consequence, a tremendously slow development of the spirit and the consciousness. The spiritual intellect must be developed by the consciousness quite deliberately, for it is not enough to think that it would move by itself into higher forms. The human material intellect can only move in a vicious circle of possibilities. It always remains stuck on the surface of an object and cannot penetrate into the same and become one with it, for without a complete identity with the object, the knowledge of it is absolutely impossible. Therefore, if a human being wants to know his or her fellow human beings, then they must be able to identify with them. And if a human being wants to know a matter, then they must also be able to identify with this. When a human being breaks through the veil surrounding his or herself and removes the shrouds of the material urge that restrict and cover it, they instantly acquire, in the physical body, the determination of their being, the inner spiritual being, the life of life itself, which is infinitely simple and uncomplicated, forms a unity of transcendental reality, cognition, knowledge, wisdom, love, and freedom. The human being is not a mere biological phenomenon. In him or her is also a small part of a fine material-conditioned, psychological organism in spiritual form, which is loaded with latent potentialities, with the might of all creational powers. Philosophical insight into the psychological nature of human beings forces the recognition and knowledge of the reality of the cosmic consciousness, the creational life power, as the basis and life of psychological beings. The human being must not only see human beings on their biological and mental planes, rather they must also grasp them on the psychical and spiritual planes. Everything that the human being inherits, everything that they bring with them from the past through billions of existences, everything that they, in this life or in past lives, has enjoyed, known, read, learned, or experienced lies hidden not in their subconsciousness, but in the memory banks. Therefore, he or she does not master the technique of concentration, and therefore, they do not command their subconsciousness and do not make full use of all their knowledge and capability. The longing for all his or her knowledge and capability coming from past lives, for the experiences and for the wisdom, thus does not lie hidden deeply within them. They must only recognize and accept the truth, thus acknowledge it and utilize it himself or herself. But for this, it is necessary for him or her to fight against their own low intelligence and to acknowledge that the material intellect does not constitute a human being if it does not also work together in the same measures with the spiritual intellect. When this happens and when the human being recognizes their spirit, the whole abundance gathered in previous lives will arise again in knowledge and wisdom, capability, freedom, love, and peace, and will richly benefit them once they learn to fetch all these values from the memory banks and to utilize them himself or herself. Knowledge, might, strength, wisdom, freedom, and love are the creational inheritance of the Absolute, and they are the human being's birthright. The human being, through their consciousness and through their spirit, is a center of thought, might, strength, and influence on everything and everyone. He or she does indeed have a body, but they themselves are not the body. The body is only an instrument and a servant of the spirit and the overall consciousness block. It is the spirit's dwelling, but not its prison. The body is the temple of the radiating spirit, the self-luminous innermost life, the creational self. The body is the castle of the spirit, which brings all powers into motion. The human being knows from this that they also breathe the breath of the spirit and not only physical breath. The human being only learns of their spirit through meditation, through knowing deliberate, inner contemplation, through deep immersion into the quietest chambers of the consciousness and the spiritual self, and by directly looking into the mirror of the inner and innermost life. They may not do this, however, in the manner in which the earth humans become fooled by religious and sectarian frauds, for this meditation is not a spiritual display, but only a fantasy-filled releasing of unreal wishes of the imagination. Real meditation in spiritual form requires an understanding gained towards one's own being and self, and a self-holding of both facts before one's eyes, that the existence of the eternal reality and truth and the deeply rooted unity of all manifestations, from a star to the form of a substance, from nature to spiritual life, are altogether only one in creational balance. Every human being, in their innermost essence, is a manifestation of the creation, and only because of this is it possible for everyone to become one with the infinite. Reflecting upon these truths of the essential existence of the creational produces knowledge and certainty. The direct display of the truth supersedes all useless objections. The realization of the truth makes everything down to the finest detail clear and self-explanatory. Life on Earth offers no full satisfaction to human beings. It is not the entirety. The real is found on the other side of the material. Material life only serves as a guide in order to reach that which is fine-sided, the spiritual. Material life is only the area of activity that gives human beings conditions and purposes in order to establish relationships with the spirit and the all-greatest, that of the creational. It is completely wrong to restrict the field of view of life only to observable phenomena and to let the valuations of objective worth determine things. The highness and greatness of life depend on to what extent it is raised to the law of the innermost life in the highest being. The relationships between human beings are only justified as long as they do not distract from the eternal laws of the spiritual nature. Neither social welfare nor national improvement are possible through merely adhering to shadows and disregarding the essential substance. The core of the truth does not belong to an individual human being alone, because the truth forms being and life of everything that exists at all. Only that which is one and united can be indivisible and all-inclusive within a self-identical existence. This is the full extent of achievements and the culmination point of all aspirations and ideals of life. In this integral spiritual view of life, the ethical basis of social and domestic relationships is rooted. Society is the totality of the individuals, intended to pierce through the veil and to enter into the realms of the immortal being, into the creation itself. The human interconnections mean nothing less than the aspiration to live in the daily life of a spiritual form, which is there in the deep background of all existing beings, but which cannot be found in the absence of truth. Through this, the love for the spiritual is lost more and more, and the human being's sense turns more and more to the material and his or her material intellect. Altruistic love is the expression of the visible unison with the infinite life, which is in the whole universe. If a family or society or nation is perceived as a means of separation of the one from the other, then such a family, society, or nation, no matter how great the goal of the concentration of human beings may be, can never succeed. Every smallest connection must flow into the absolute oneness, which does not exclude an iota from itself. This truth must always remain before the eyes of the human being during everyday work, if his or her deeds and actions and his or her thinking should be free of selfishness and in harmony with the universal events. Life is a teaching of the spirit for the spirit. The correct behavior of the family and the administration of the country and the society form a part of the universal determinations, which have equipped the totality of the beings with strictly impartial laws. The human being lives because the creation exists, and his life must be so balanced and relatively perfect, as the creation itself is balanced and relatively perfect. The human being lives in the creation being, it breathes and hovers in him. The lack of the spiritual, for which it is worth living, or the need for a practical life philosophy and life psychology in the present time is often responsible for the crisis in the lives of human beings and in their concerns. Already for a long time, the modern ranting human being has made great efforts to find peace and freedom, but so far all his efforts have fruitlessly blown away and escaped. But the human being of the new time, the human being of the Aquarius era, now faces an easily solvable problem, for if they now lay the foundation stone of the truth, then they gain a whole new structure of philosophical and psychological values for a happy, free, and peaceful spiritual life in the future. A free spiritual life which is based on everything that represents the best in the cultural and spiritual inheritance of the earth, the spiritual truth. If the earth human being now finally recognizes and acknowledges this truth, completely frees himself or herself from all religions, sects, and other erroneous teachings and their delusional imaginations, and finally aligns themselves with the spiritual and creational laws, then they have triumphed. Only the truth is serviceable and brings the human being progress. Religion, erroneous teachings, and sectarianism, however, are unserviceable to the human being and throw them back into the deepest darkness.
Contact Report 14.
Everyone has the right to learn and to be taught.
Contact Report 15.
Every earnestly striving human being has the right to develop along those lines in which he or she simply is interested in.
In every human being, certain secrets should be kept.
Contact Report 18.
The human being should try to react to the word or the term creation as if something very beautiful or good is being referred to, through which a change should be effected in his or her thinking. But since this does not happen, insofar he or she has not recognized the creation for what it really is. But how can the word and the designation creation attain such a deep significance for the human being that a change in his or her entire psychological way of behaving occurs, in his or her emotional awareness, his or her feeling of life, his or her ways of reacting, if he or she does not constantly and repeatedly ponder over the nature of the creation? The human being should try quite simply to bring certain designations of characteristics, which are applicable in regard to the nature of creation, like ever-present, almighty, and all-knowing, into association with the word or the designation creation. The everyday human being, as well as the common human, the so-called atheist, the egoist and materialist, the agnostic, find the word creation highly uninteresting. Yet why? To them it is entirely unknown, and they have no idea what the creation essentially is. But so it is with very many human beings with the term creation. Thousands of millions of human beings who are led into delusion by religions do not understand the word creation. If they pronounce the unreal religious name God, then they are of the gone astray view that in this way the creation would be referred to. Yet what an evil, irrational teaching that is. Therefore, it is very important to know as much as possible about the nature of the creation and to experience it so that the word becomes meaningful, lifts one up inwardly, and leaves an impression as soon as it is heard. The experience reveals that the creation is unending beauty, a beauty above all beauty, boundless, intense happiness without end, essence of wisdom, knowledge, ability, truth, and absolute distinctness. Once that is recognized by the human being, then he or she instantly traces every one of his or her joys back to its origin, to the infinite joy of creation. Wherever he or she sees something beautiful, be it a flower, an animal, or a human being, or anything else, he or she thus instantly brings it into association with the unending beauty of the creation herself. Wherever the human being sees cognition reach expression in one form or another, in an impressive and uplifting manner, there he or she knows that it has its roots in the endless cognition that is the creation. Wherever life stirs, be it even in just the tiniest being, in a creature such as, for example, the microbe, there, behind this life, he or she glimpses the endless, the eternal, and the creational. From that, he or she attempts to deepen and expand his or her understanding and feeling by thinking the nature of the creational and its inescapable presence over, at any time and in any space, in many kinds of ways, in daily life and experience. The creation exists in every human being as a part piece of himself or herself. Once this thought has deeply penetrated the human being and become his or her experience, then any fear and all doubt in him or her disappear. Once he or she knows that the creation is all-knowing and almighty, then he or she gains peace and security in his inner self and is immune from stupid thoughts and wrong feelings. Repeated pondering over the ever-presence, truth, essence of wisdom, and the ability and knowledge of the creation as permanently eternal, as dignity and value, allows the word and the designation creation to become something very meaningful in the human being, something which evokes transformations in the feelings and transformations in his or her manner of thinking. The more his or her intelligence is effective in this direction, the more it gains radiating light, the more powerful his or her personality becomes, and the more prosperous his or her whole life and work becomes. Again and again, the human being who lives in clarity of consciousness produces in himself or herself anew the strong, fine spiritual perception that the creational is far more real than that which his body feels. This fine spiritual perception incessantly rules the human being who lives for the spirit. The creational takes possession of his or her consciousness, which is why his or her senses are full of peace, strength, joy, knowledge, essence of wisdom, truth, and hope. All measures taken by the normal human beings in their material intellectual thinking to attain peace, happiness, and strength always turn out to be deceptive, while this permanent controlledness of the human being who is living according to the Spirit is pulsed through by the dynamic power of the creation. The human being who lives for the Spirit is very dynamic in all things. He or she incessantly attempts to reach his or her fulfillment as quickly as possible. Therefore, as long as he or she lives, he or she uses the time, with all the energy available to him or her, for turning himself or herself to the creational ability. He or she will never allow this undertaking to be lost. All kinds of things can happen over time, yet his or her desire for the creational will never disappear in him or her. He or she may encounter obstacles, suddenly have no sense and taste anymore for necessary material things, but he or she never loses the taste and sense for the creation, because he or she knows that the creation embodies the true being. Only those human beings harvest enormous spiritual and consciousness-based fruits, who fight hard for their consciousness-based and spiritual good and progress, for knowledge, truth, logic, essence of wisdom, and love, because these do not simply fall into their laps. First, before the first results can be obtained, it is necessary to learn the spiritual intellectual manner of thinking, that is to say, the path of the creational thinking, and to recognize its absolute correctness and distinctness. However, once these initial successes come to light, then the recognizer steps ahead with great strides and widens himself or herself in spirit and consciousness into a factor of might. Only through this do already recognized facts, the knowledge, the truth, logic, essence of wisdom and love, which must, however, first be created in a hard way, become a matter of implicitness. Yet the path does not end at this point, because the further searching, inquiring, developing, and the further recognizing lead into the boundless duration of time. All sorts of things may happen in the course of time and keep the human beings from doing what they had planned to do, yet the human being who lives in accord with the Spirit knows no bounds and does not allow himself or herself to be led away from his determinations by any kind of events or bad future prospects. For him or her, the future already exists in the present, so everything must be done here and now in order to achieve the highest spiritual state and highest state of consciousness. He or she does not know the anxiety of the future and does not know the anxiety about the future, because they exist only in a material intellectual way of thinking, but never in the spiritual intellectual thinking, in which the future is as present as the present itself. Thereby the human being who lives in accord with the Spirit can and is able to solve the problems of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow already here and now, and to steer them into the desired paths. To think for and with the Spirit brings only advantages to every life form. Therefore, the human being should raise himself more and more, through intensive seeking and inquiring, into the state of the spiritual thinking and into the knowledge about the creational truth and essence of wisdom. He or she should time and again create in himself or herself the strong perceiving in a fine spiritual wise that something is there that gives him or her immeasurable power and frees him or her from unreal assumptions, the truth of the creation. Again and again and again, the human being should create in himself or herself the strong perceiving in a fine spiritual wise that he or she is in the ocean of the creational light, its essence of wisdom, its knowledge of the truth, of the logic, and of the love, which only in its entirety enables the being for him or her. The joy of the human being who is turned to the creation consists in attesting his or her veneration to the creational and to the creational, this by accepting the almighty will in the creational laws and by making the absolute distinctness of these laws one's own destiny, and by beneficially evaluating them. He or she expresses his or her dedication to the laws through the learning and utilization of all spiritual and consciousness-based facts, but never through belief, assumptions, serving, and submissiveness. The only way to learn is made up of the unremitting making of efforts and striving to attain higher spiritual and consciousness-based cognitions, and the application of the abilities which have been brought to unfolding through this. Of decisive significance thereby are patience and endurance, and the development of higher understanding, recognition and application of the cosmic and universal love, deepening of the spiritual and consciousness-based knowledge and ability, as well as the shutting off of material intellectual thought potency such as egoism, materialism, pride, envy, greed, and jealousy, and so forth, because only this guarantees the recognition and following of the creational laws. The human being who thinks spiritually is permanently striving to direct the creation to him or herself and to make it recognizable within him or herself, this in such a way that he or she tries to make possible what is impossible for normal human beings, and indeed with success. Day after day, month after month, and year after year, the human being connected to the spirit calls upon the creative and thereby gains knowledge, essence of wisdom, love, logic, truth, and power, until he or she finally experiences the creational within him or herself and is able to evaluate it, whereby it becomes more real to him or her than the feeling of his or her body. While he or she is in contact with other human beings and speaking to them, he or she sees only the creational in front of him or her. While he or she sees others in front of him or herself, he or she sees only the creational in them, because for him or her the creational always takes first place. For him or her, the creational is the greatest among all things, which is why everything in him or her is confronting itself with the creational, and why material things are no longer able to awaken a craving in him or her. He or she is no longer exposed to material temptations, since what he or she has inherent in him or herself as spiritual and consciousness-based knowledge and ability is his or her conversational partner and his or her guide. He or she speaks and converses with it, and he or she lives with it in the given laws of the creation. This way of living means the being in truth, and this being is incomparably more beautiful than this universe's most beautiful manifestation. Nothing is able to, any more longer, tempt a human being developed in this way, not the greatest wealth of the world and not a death threat of evil-minded creatures. His or her inner wealth in the creational is inexhaustible and immortal, and nothing is able to awaken any kind of fear in him or her, because that with which he or she lives and enlivens his or her being is unending might. Therefore, nothing is able to mislead him or her to untruth and falseness, for his or her whole being is unending truth through the creational recognition. Nothing is able to guide him or her into the unreal in the darkness of thoughts from external powers leading into delusion, because every fraction of a second of his or her spiritual intellectual thinking is unending light. Nothing is able to change his or her being sense of the truth or make him or her unhappy, since he or she lives in the being of the creation and in her sense, and he or she lives in unending joy. If, however, the human being has an evil or negative attitude towards the spiritual things of life, him or herself and the creation, then nothing at all will prosper for him or her. Even a very favorable circumstance, which would otherwise be very valuable, becomes a source of unfortune and unpeace for him or her if his or her attitude is only material intellectual and his or her thoughts and feelings also influence the environment in this form. Even if the human being in question pursues no matter how good intentions, the result in this case will be completely negative. However, for the human being living in accord with the Spirit, all and everything will always be the right circumstance for inner growth and a very good opportunity to pay tribute to the creational in every form. In truth, only that human being who permanently carries and maintains high and noble spiritual thoughts and spiritual feelings in him or herself is great, and one can only call that human being creative who permanently lives and thinks with the consciousness of the creational in himself or herself. That means that materially, intellectually great human beings may be just as completely uncreational and spiritually absolutely insignificant as fomenters of peace, religious saints, helpers in distress, misery and illness, and last but not least, those who are at the forefront in wars, etc., and provide medical services, etc. Those kinds of human beings are most often only driven by thirst for adventure, pity and self-pity and other false material intellectual thoughts and feelings resulting from them, without possessing the slightest recognition of the creational in themselves. Very often they are led into the unreal by unreal religions, which preach false love for the next one, and equally false godly teachings and formulas of submissiveness. Yet, what is the difference between such life forms and the human being who lives in accord with the Spirit? In general, the normal human being allows him or herself to be led and overcome by lower material intellectual impulsations. When he or she once has good feelings, then these are never permanent and soon disappear again to, again, make room for lower impulsations. On the other hand, the human being who lives for the Spirit never lets even the smallest creational impulsations fade out. Rather, he or she embraces them and expands them endlessly. Low impulsations find no anchorage in him or her, since the waters of essence of wisdom and knowledge in him or her are too deep for a low and short anchor chain to be able to reach their ground. The human being who lives in accord with the Spirit enduringly tries to maintain him or herself at all times and under all circumstances in the realm of swinging waves of creational impulsations. Should these once be endangered by any influences, then he or she refers to the creation in highest potency, and in so doing protects him or herself in her highest power of swinging waves from the negative. He or she proceeds in this manner until the creational V-sin has produced the absolute distinctness of the defense against the negative in him or her. The human being is always bearer of something or other. Many bear depressing feelings in themselves, others grief, worries, problems, hopes, and other thoughts of material intellectual nature. Also, anxieties and imaginations of pictures of any kind, good as well as ugly ones, belong in his material intellectual thinking. But the human being, who lives in accord with the Spirit, is bearer of the creational, of the spiritual. He or she is a carrier of creation, a conscious bearer of spirit, because he or she all the time carries the knowledge and ability of the creational laws in him or herself. And the more the old nature of the material intellectual thinking wants to make him or her the bearer of its illogicality, the more he or she works intensively to make the creational prevailing in him or herself and to anchor it firmly. Even thoughts of the most negative which come and want to destroy his or her spiritual intellectual thinking, he or she immediately transforms into creational power and essence of wisdom. In this way, he or she turns everything into the creational and carries it within him or herself as a block of might. Thereby, he is a walking temple of creation. The intelligences of the human beings living for the creation become more and more spiritualized and penetrate deeper and deeper into the spiritual consciousness. The human being who lives in accord with the Spirit penetrates ever deeper into all things with his or her cognitive capability and comprehends the warmth of the fire of the creational presence in everything. Thereby, the spiritually thinking human being recognizes and becomes conscious of the power and the truth of the creational presence everywhere. That which therefore remains unrecognized by the everyday sensory perceptions is perceived spiritually consciously by the human being who lives in accord with the creation. He or she, therefore, always sees in all things and life forms the creational presence and the application of the creational laws. He or she possesses a spiritual image of the power of the creation's presence, and he or she dedicates all the precious energies of his or her life and being to the creational knowledge, its truth, power, and essence of wisdom, and thereby to the ability of his or her part of the creation which lives within him or her, his or her spirit. The material life on the earth is like a transitory game, a phenomenon that dissipates, but behind it lies the eternal and timeless truth, the spirit, the creational presence, and the reality of the creation. This creational reality bears within it all realms and domains of the capability of essence of wisdom. This is the lasting, the timelessly permanent and immortal. This is not a game, but eternal and timeless truth and essence of wisdom, knowledge, freedom, love, logic, and ability, the relative absolutely full development, the absolute distinctness. Very many human beings fear to live in the sense of the creation, and they think and assume that they would only have to remain with the one which is to take away their anxiety about the death, with a god of a religion who has promised them in conscious irrational teaching and for his entirely own benefit, to take away their anxiety about the death, if they would, in irrational belief and submissively believe his lies, whereby they get into his enslavement and become consciousness-based unfree. The steady repetition of this irrational religious teaching has the effect that the believers find an imaginary and deceptive fulfillment and are subject to an evil delusion which cuts them off from all consciousness-based rationality, whereby also their spiritual intellectual thinking is impeded and suppressed and enslaved. Only very few people do not fear to live in the sense of the creation and know that this alone guarantees the life and the being, because thereby the creational laws are fulfilled, and these in turn transform the life and the being into the life and being.
Contact Report 20.
No goals are achieved without effort and privation. Knowledge, truth, wisdom, love, and skill take their toll, as does any work before it is rewarded.
I will have no choice but to spoon up the soup I have got myself into.
Contact Report 25.
This means that the human Earth human also has to take on a certain free-willed undertaking and has to carry certain things himself or herself. It is completely wrong of him or her to think that he or she can only take advantage of help and kindness without contributing anything to this help themselves. The terrestrial human being must learn that his or her selfishness as well as his or her boundless egoism are completely out of place and have no justification whatsoever. When the Earth human being is to be helped, he or she himself also has to contribute his part to this help. But if the Earth human being believes that he or she can only take and has nothing to give for it, then he is on erroneous paths. He or she can only defeat his or her evil egoism if he or she realizes that two different factors, forming a unity in themselves, always result in an overall unity. In other words, in this case, this means that give and take must be combined to form one unit. When we give you spiritual and consciousness-based goods and knowledge, etc., then it is your duty to process these goods and knowledge and also to contribute certain things to the attainment of the whole. But if the human being of Earth thinks and acts according to the principle of his or her illogicality, that taking is more beneficial than giving, then he or she will not free himself or herself from his or her evil egoism. And the human being of Earth is selfish both individually and in the masses, so exploitation is very widespread in your world.
Contact Report 26.
Because every form of life is justified in its existence and can think and act according to its own forms at its own discretion.
Contact Report 28.
If an individual disregards a law or recommendations, he or she not only causes himself or herself personal harm, but also affects others. This is the law of the spiritual power and of the consciousness power, which spread their swinging waves to all life forms. Through a consciously committed guilt, wide waves are thrown, which also hit innocent people with their beating powers. This is a law of nature in order to create unity in cooperation.
Contact Report 31.
I regard a human being as simply a human being, whether he or she is from this world or another, or whether he or she is a beggar or God in person, and whether he or she is ignorant or wise, they are all of equal value. No one has more rights than any other, and nobody is greater than anyone else.
Recognize at last that an excessive modesty and selflessness are equivalent to an evil degeneration, which inevitably always demands its negative tribute. However, every work is worth its wages, and always in its appropriate and different values. The wages consist on the one hand of consciousness-based ones, and on the other of material values.
Every work is worth its wages.
Contact Report 33.
The laws of nature teach that only balance corresponds to the rightful course of life, as I have already explained. A forcible action only finds its balance through forcible nonviolence. Forcible actions, however, occur in endless forms and types, in very small and in very large measures. A forcible action can never be broken through a proffered peace or be settled otherwise. A forcible action which has been settled through a proffered peace continues to boil beneath the surface and will one day break out as a forcible action again. The negative can never be defeated through the positive or be subordinated or settled through it. This can only be done through a neutral positivity, through a balance. This entails in itself positive and negative in equal parts. So therefore, a forcible action must only be performed through logical forcible nonviolence in a natural balance, and a forcible action that is executed against another forcible action must not be equally negative or positive as the one which is being fought or tackled. It must be neutral positive and balanced, thus a forcible nonviolence. The laws of nature teach that each life that poses a threat to the continued existence of others or of similar life forms should be destroyed if it exerts degenerated forcible actions. The human life forms, however, are Visin who are mighty with development-capable thinking, by which they are able to delineate their own rational laws in compliance with the laws of nature. Through these, they are given the opportunity to evade the total elimination of life forms by bringing them to a safe place of detention from which the degenerated ones are deprived of every possibility of returning to society, as well as from the multiplication of their kind. Under certain circumstances, however, there are always exceptions where these kinds of laws cannot be brought into use, and therefore there must be a return to the pure laws of nature if the order is not disturbed in their operation, but obtained through it. Under certain circumstances, the complete elimination of the life forms in self-defense cannot be excluded, if a threat to the life and existence can only be averted thereby, and it comes down to the maintenance of the continued existence of other life forms as long as they live in correct form. This representation and application of the laws of nature, however, can only occur in a purely logical form and in absolute self-defense, and with a precise knowledge of the use of the laws of nature. This requires a vast knowledge of the laws themselves and their application.
Contact Report 38.
Every learning requires long periods of time and a lot of patience.
Contact Report 39.
If the Earth human wants to think and evolve correctly and in accordance with the creation, then he or she may neither move his or her thought forms in degenerated negative paths nor in degenerated positive paths. For both are degeneracies that can produce very bad and negative consequences, thus they are contrary to the creation. Right thinking and evolving express themselves through a well-balanced and neutral wise of thinking and through right actions and right feelings, which then generate and send out identical forces through which life is produced and maintained, and an evolution that is truly appropriate for creation is followed.
Contact Report 43.
Every form of life is assigned its place and its destiny in its life, so that its existence for everything and with everything is evolutionary, without it appearing to be more valuable for that reason.
Contact Report 53.
The Earth human being is to be urged not to complicate all things and to seek the truth where it can truly be found.
Contact Report 55.
It is often only a small step from knowledge to ability.
Contact Report 62.
She, Margaret Rufer, must, however, learn to accept open and honest words and to put aside her aggression against them. She knows very well that only clear and open words lead to the goal, and that diplomatic expressions are equivalent to lies.
Contact Report 74.
Even false and potential traitors should not simply be pilloried, because they too have rights that must be protected.
Contact Report 79.
If one wants to accomplish certain tasks and achieve certain goals, then one has to take a lot on oneself.
Sure, that is the truth. Nevertheless, it does not mean that one should destroy oneself on account of this.
Certainly not.
Contact Report 93.
But she should also be aware that one should let the past be the past, and not to rummage in it, which you should absolutely explain to her so as not to make her think that you would become angry about past things and events. It is probably right that you should give everyone a chance, but you cannot do it endlessly. There must be an end at some point. But with other human beings on the earth, the case is different because they should be given chances so that they can seize them and learn in recognition of themselves. It is not about fighting in the same form as you are, because you had to learn to fight in order to survive, while the others have to learn to fight in order to learn.
Well said, my child, but somewhat complicated.
Contact Report 829.
Remain independent at all times and be self-aware. Think for yourself, independently, and do not let others think for you, if you are never a believer and ever will be. Trust only yourself, and also only if you think correctly and are able to make correct decisions, which will bring you success, but never disadvantage. Never rely on what other people say, but consider and check everything for its reality and truth, and only then, when you have recognized the correctness of what you have been told or advised as truth, use what you have been told or advised for your benefit, as well as for your knowledge and advantage. Do not look at what other people are and do, but always strive to think for yourself and to decide and do what is best in order to recognize what is correct. Whatever you do, do it with humility, decency, honor, and dignity, as well as with understanding and reason. Always be for yourself alone in thought, decision and action, and never indulge in arrogance, megalomania and haughtiness, as well as dishonesty, arrogance, recklessness, conceit, lying, heedlessness, vulnerability and deceit, etc. Never believe in a higher power above you, not in an imaginary god, gods, or any other power, because you yourself are the power, energy, and strength above yourself. Therefore, it is you yourself who leads and manages your own life. Know about yourself, about your own energy and power. Know about your abilities and your skills, and use everything at all times in a correct and inviolable way. Do not believe in human beings, but know about reality and its truth, and use this alone to do what is right, to lead your life, and also to act with honor and dignity. Know for yourself the formation of your life, existence and well-being, and know only your actions in reality and truth, and recognize for yourself the reality and its power, as well as the knowledge of the truth of life, far from any belief in a god or human beings. Cultivate your own life, your own thoughts, your own way of life, your own ability, your own logic and your own understanding, as well as your own reason, in order to evaluate and decide everything, your actions, your success in life, as well as your true peace, tranquility and righteousness, but also your true love, your well-being towards all living things and towards effective reality, and create your own effective true knowledge in incontrovertible truth. What belongs especially to true humanity is the good and valuable, but never the negative and evil, all of which is to be controlled, tamed, and conquered. Consider everything always correct, for it is for your own good. Above all, guard yourself against all unworthiness, which is to be conquered and conquered as unworthiness, such as the following bad degenerations: being abstemious, being affected, being aggressive, being ambivalent, being arbitrary, being nailed down, being unsocial, being presumptuous, being malicious, being suspicious, being arrogant, being pushy, being pompous, being blasé, being bigoted, being choleric, being spiteful, being demagogic, being despotic, being dogmatic, being dominant, being brazen, being selfish, being egomaniacal, being self-centered, jealous, high-handed, simple-minded, mendacious, hypocritical, conceited, one-sided, elitist, disgusting, arrogant, mean, frustrated, stubborn, impatient, irascible, nasty, slovenly, craving for favors, gracious, merciful, pompous, being insidious, being condescending, being aloof, being boring, being snobbish, being ignorant, being a rabble-rouser, being hysterical, being devious, being cunning, being hopeless, being resigned, being rascally, being infamous, being scheming, being petty, being complicated, being lethargic, being manipulative, being despondent, being naive, being narcissistic, being neurotic, being superficial, being ostentatious, being pedantic, being phlegmatic, being reserved, rejecting advice, being inconsiderate, being self-satisfied, being self-righteous, being self-addicted, being in love with oneself, being unscrupulous, being inflexible, and so on.
Contact Report 836.
Every human being is responsible for himself or herself and absolutely for themselves, however they act or do not act. Every human being must think, consider, decide, and act for themselves, and whether it is correct or wrong what they decide and how they act, that is and remains their very own destiny.
Contact Report 840.
Let yourselves be lifted to the level of the normal and honest, for this is the way that never produces anger and enmity, but peace, friendship, love, as well as harmony. These values alone grant life.
Contact Report 842.
My advice is to think for oneself and to see, perceive, understand, and accept reality and its truth as effective reality. Of course, every human being must always be open-minded and respect the respective faith of every human being as such in such a manner that he does not object to him for the sake of his faith, harm him physically in any way, or harm him with regard to material forms. This is also true if he is completely blindly addicted to sectarianism, as is particularly true of sectarian and therefore God-delusional Americans. This must be said specifically because many of the earthlings tend, because they do not have the true values of ethics and morality as a whole sufficiently intuited, to rise up ethically, morally badly against fellow human beings.
Contact Report 844.
Human beings of the earth, do not indulge in hatred, revenge, retaliation, and destruction, but might make within yourselves a hearth of love, happiness, and peace. Banish within yourselves hatred, revenge, and retaliation, and stop everything that brings death, sorrow, suffering, misery, and destruction. Do not create discord, strife, war and destruction and wretchedness, gloom, harm, affliction, distress, and pain, but grow beyond yourselves and be greater in yourselves than your enemies and all antagonists. Only those who are weak seek in hatred, revenge, and retaliation to gain a victory, his right, satisfaction, and contentment. But in doing so, he destroys his right and creates injustice, which makes him an enemy of his fellow man and the spawn of evil, but might also make him an outcast in society. Create justice and peace in yourselves and in the world. Do not judge and recognize that those who harm you are poor in their thoughts, decisions and actions, for they are weak, wretched in their speech, as well as incompetents and bunglers in their actions. Create in yourselves love, happiness, and peace. Be good and do right in your thoughts, decisions, and actions, if you are self-confident and blameless and are without guilt. If you justly defend yourselves against injustice done to you in a controlled manner, without strife, war, death, violence, or destruction, for such only brings new strife, warfare, and death. Be true and effective human beings, who protect the precious life of every single human being from mischief and death, as you give yourself all protection and keep yourself from all harm, for your neighbor is a human being like yourself.
Contact Report 849.
A loud word is also appropriate and justified when there is stubbornness or bossiness, etc., which usually requires speaking up or even yelling. I think that if you keep revisiting what you once learnt, then it just sticks in your mind and somehow becomes a habit as well. We on Earth lack just about everything, such as openness, financial security, creativity, perfection and optimism, professionalism, happiness, family orientation and privacy, good success, compassion, kindness, perseverance, spontaneity, trust, humility, health, faithfulness, real and unaffected fun, true honesty, love, and accuracy.
Contact Report 852.
Deep within the human beings, in addition to the religious delusion, fear, hatred and revenge, retaliation, addiction, and the delusion of needing to be rich, of needing to be in control, of self-expression, and of being more than one's neighbor, in addition to the fanatical desire to be right and to be able to exercise power. And all this was already indoctrinated into the human being in youth and in the course of life, namely through the upbringing and pampering of parents, family and relatives, acquaintances, friends, teachers, religion, etc., and has deposited itself unprocessed and deeply anchored in the character, and is constantly waiting to erupt immediately when the opportunity presents itself.
Contact Report 864.
What has already happened cannot be changed. The past remains the past, so it is also nonsensical for human beings to mourn it, because the whole thing cannot be changed by thinking about what has happened. What has happened is what has happened, and nothing can be done about it.
That is correct.
But many human beings don't want to understand this and never do, so they constantly mourn the past, also the deceased. But they can't bring them back, they only harm themselves.